If someone had told me that the most important moment of my marriage would happen under a bed, I would have laughed and said they were being ridiculous. Brides do not hide on their wedding night. They celebrate, they cry, they hold their husband's hand and believe their life is finally beginning. That was exactly what I thought I was doing. I was still wearing my wedding dress. The lace scratched slightly against my skin. My bare feet pressed into the cold wooden floor as I crouched under the bed, holding my breath, trying not to laugh. It was supposed to be a harmless joke, a silly surprise for my husband. I imagined him opening the door, calling my name, panic rising in his voice. And then I would crawl out, laughing, and we would tell this story for years. Because that was who Daniel was, or at least who I believed he was. Kind, soft-spoken, the man who promised me a quiet life, a safe life, a family built on trust. The door opened. I smiled, ready to burst out. But the footsteps were wrong. They were not Daniel's. They were slow, confident, heavy with ownership. A woman entered the room. She did not hesitate. She did not look around. She sat on the edge of the bed as if it belonged to her. Then she spoke, and with just a few sentences, spoken casually into a phone, my entire marriage collapsed before it had even begun. I lay there, frozen, my wedding dress gathering dust beneath the bed, listening to my mother-in-law calmly explain how I would be divorced within a year, how the house would be taken, how I would not fight back, how I was already trapped. In that moment, I understood something terrifying. I was not a wife in this family. I was an asset, a mistake they planned to erase. A woman they believed was too weak to resist. If you think you know what betrayal feels like, stay with me, because what I heard next changed the course of my life forever. And if you want to hear the rest of this story, comment number 1 below. Daniel and I did not meet in a dramatic way. There was no music, no spilled coffee, no moment that felt like fate announcing itself. We met in a waiting room, a small GP clinic in Leeds, grey chairs, a humming vending machine, a television mounted too high on the wall, playing the news without sound. I was there for a routine checkup. Daniel was there with his mother. He smiled at me politely, not confidently, not flirtatiously, just politely. We started talking because there was nothing else to do, about how slow the clinic was, about the weather, about how strange it was that people always got sick on Mondays. It was easy. Too easy, maybe. Daniel listened, really listened. When I spoke, he did not interrupt. He did not try to impress me. He did not talk about himself much at all. At the time, I thought that was maturity. We started seeing each other a few weeks later. Coffee after work, short walks, simple dinners. He never rushed me, never pushed, never raised his voice. When I told him I liked quiet evenings at home, he said, "I want that too. Peace matters more than anything." When I told him I had been hurt before, he nodded and replied, "I am not here to change you. I just want to build something calm." That word stayed with me. Calm. Daniel was calm in a way that felt safe, predictable, steady. He worked in logistics, nothing glamorous, long hours, always tired. His mother, Margaret, lived nearby. He spoke about her often, always respectfully, always carefully.
She sacrificed a lot for me, he said once. It has always been just us. At the time, I thought that meant loyalty. Now I know it meant something else. Margaret was polite to me in the beginning, formal, measured. She asked about my job, my savings, my plans. I thought she was just practical, an old schoolwoman who liked to know where things stood. When Daniel proposed, it was quiet, no crowd, no restaurant. He simply took my hands one evening and said, "I do not want drama, Emily. I want stability. I want you." I said yes without hesitation. I had my own house, a modest one just outside Manchester. I had bought it before we married, with help from my father and years of saving. Daniel insisted the house stay in my name. "It is easier that way," he said, "and it makes me feel better knowing you are secure." That should have sounded generous. It did sound generous. I believed him. When Margaret heard about the house, she smiled tightly and said, "You are very independent. That is rare these days." I took it as a compliment. Looking back, there were small moments, so small I ignored them. Daniel liked to know where I was, not in a jealous way, in a concerned way. "Just so I do not worry," he would say. He asked about my spending, not controlling, just curious. "We should be responsible," he said. "We are a family now." Margaret sometimes made comments that felt slightly off. "You are lucky to have Daniel," she said more than once. "Men like him are not easy to find." Or, "It is good you do not argue much. Conflict ruins marriages." I nodded. I agreed, because I wanted this to work, because everything looked reasonable on the surface. That was the problem. Nothing felt obviously wrong. Nothing felt dangerous. On our wedding day, everything went smoothly. Too smoothly. Margaret watched us closely. Daniel held my hand a little tighter than usual. When the guests left and the house finally went quiet, I felt relief. This is it, I thought. This is the beginning. That was why I hid under the bed that night. Not out of fear, not out of doubt, but because I felt safe enough to be playful, naive enough to believe nothing could go wrong, and because I trusted the man I had just married completely. I did not know yet that some people mistake silence for weakness and calm for permission. I would understand that soon enough. I stayed under the bed longer than I should have. At first, it was because I did not want to ruin the surprise. Then it was because something felt wrong. Margaret did not move around the room the way a guest would. She did not hesitate. She did not look uncertain. She sat down on the edge of the bed and exhaled slowly, as if this room belonged to her, as if she had been waiting for this moment. Then she took out her phone. I heard the soft click of the screen unlocking, the familiar sound of a call connecting. Her voice changed the moment someone answered. Not softer, not warmer, colder, sharper, efficient. "It is done," she said. There was a pause. I could hear another voice through the phone, faint but male. Yes, the wedding went exactly as planned. My heart began to beat faster, but I told myself not to panic. This was just nerves, wedding nerves. Margaret crossed one leg over the other. "She trusts him completely," she continued. "That is the important part." I pressed my hand against my mouth. "Of course she does," she said, almost amused. "She is exactly the type Daniel needed." Another pause.
No family nearby, no brothers.
No one asking questions. I felt a chill run through me. Margaret leaned back slightly, lowering her voice. The house is in her name, bought before the marriage, clean paperwork. She laughed softly. Yes, I know. That is why this works. I stopped breathing. Daniel has been patient, she went on. I told him not to rush her, not to scare her. Her tone was calm, practical, as if she were discussing a business deal. We lived together for a while, 6 months, maybe a year. She nodded to herself. Then it becomes uncomfortable. Arguments, distance, a pause. No, no drama. We do not want drama. She smiled. A quiet separation, mutual agreement. My chest tightened. And after that, Margaret said, we take what we came for. The words landed heavily in the room. She will not fight, she added. Women like her never do. I felt something crack inside me. There is nothing she can do once Daniel positions himself correctly, Margaret continued. She listens to him, looks to him for reassurance. I remembered Daniel telling me, let me handle it, you do not need to worry. Margaret sighed, almost bored. She is calm, too calm. That makes her predictable. I lay there frozen, my wedding dress brushing against my legs, my mind racing. The voice on the other end of the phone said something I could not hear clearly. Margaret nodded again. Yes, I raised him well, she said. He understands that security matters more than sentiment. She stood up and began pacing slowly. I told him from the beginning, love is useful, but ownership is permanent. I felt sick. Do not worry, she said. She will sign what we need her to sign, eventually. She stopped walking. And if she hesitates, Daniel knows how to handle that. Her voice did not change. There was no anger in it, no cruelty, just certainty. The call ended. Margaret placed the phone back in her bag. She smoothed the duvet with her hands. Good, she murmured to herself. Everything is in place. She left the room without another glance. The door closed softly behind her. I did not move. I lay there, staring into darkness, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure someone would hear it. House, money, control. Those were the words that echoed in my head. Not marriage, not family, not love. I understood then that this was not a misunderstanding, not an overreaction, not a bad moment taken out of context. It was a plan, carefully built, quietly executed, and designed to look like a marriage from the outside. I had walked into it willingly. The most terrifying part was not what Margaret had said. It was how confident she sounded, as if my future had already been decided, as if my role in this story was finished. As I lay there beneath the bed, I realized something else. They did not think I was weak because I was emotional. They thought I was weak because I was silent. And they believed silence meant surrender. They were wrong, but they would not realize that for a long time. I stayed there for a long time after the door closed. I do not know how long. Minutes, maybe? It could have been longer. Time stopped behaving normally. My body reacted before my mind did. My hands went numb. Not shaking, just empty.
My feet were cold against the floor, but I could not move them. It was as if the message from my brain had been delayed. Get up, leave, breathe. None of it happened. I did not cry. That surprised me. I had always imagined that if something like this ever happened to me, I would break, collapse, scream, run. But instead, there was only a strange stillness. My chest felt tight, but not in a way that asked for tears. It felt contained, pressed, like everything inside me had decided to wait. I listened to the house. The quiet hum of electricity, the distant sound of traffic outside, the ticking of a clock somewhere downstairs. Life was continuing, completely unaware that something fundamental had shifted. Eventually, I crawled out from under the bed. I stood up too quickly and had to grab the edge of the mattress to steady myself. The room tilted for a moment, then it settled again. I looked at myself in the mirror. My hair was still done, my makeup untouched. I looked exactly like a bride. That was when it began to feel unreal. I peeled the wedding dress off slowly and hung it on the wardrobe door. The lace brushed my arms. The fabric felt heavier than before. I sat on the edge of the bed, and I replayed every word I had heard. Not just what Margaret said, but how she said it. There was no anger, no urgency, no emotion at all. This was not a reaction, it was a script. That was the moment the truth finally reached me. They had not decided this tonight. They had not reacted to something I had done. This had been planned, long before I walked down that aisle, long before Daniel took my hands and promised me a future. Every gentle reassurance, every calm sentence, every moment I had mistaken for care, it all had a function. I thought back to the way Daniel always said, "Let me handle it." The way Margaret asked about my finances with a smile. The way she spoke about independence as if it were a curiosity. It was never small talk. It was preparation. I did not feel stupid. I did not feel ashamed. What I felt was clarity, a sharp, uncomfortable clarity. I was not dealing with a misunderstanding. I was dealing with people who believed they were entitled to what I owned. People who had mistaken my quiet nature for weakness. I stood up again, more carefully this time. My legs felt strange, like they did not quite belong to me yet, but they held. I walked to the window and looked out into the dark street. Nothing had changed. The same parked cars, the same streetlight flickering slightly at the corner. And yet, I knew that if I walked out of this house right now, I would leave something important behind. Not the marriage, not the illusion, but the truth. And I was not ready to let them keep it. I did not make any decisions that night. I did not confront anyone. I did not send messages or make calls. I understood something instinctively. The first move was not action. It was observation. People reveal more when they believe you are still asleep. So I washed my face. I put on comfortable clothes. I lay down in bed as if nothing had happened. My heart still beat faster than normal. My thoughts still moved too quickly. But underneath all of that, something else was forming. Control. If you are still listening at this point, pause for a second. Not for me, for yourself. Ask yourself one question.
Have you ever ignored a quiet warning because everything looked fine on the surface? If the answer is yes, comment number 1 below and stay with me, because this is where the story truly begins. By morning, the shock had settled into something quieter. Not peace, not acceptance, awareness. I stood in the kitchen holding a mug of tea that had gone cold without me noticing. The house smelled the same, sounded the same. Nothing about it reflected what I now knew, and that made the decision harder. I had 2 choices. They were very clear. I could leave. I could pack a bag, call my father, walk out of the front door and never look back. I could explain everything later. I could protect myself immediately. No one would blame me. Most people would call it strength. The second option was to stay, to smile, to listen, to pretend I was still exactly who they thought I was. That option felt dangerous. I thought about leaving for a long time, longer than I expected. I imagined the relief, the clean break, the moment of telling Daniel that I knew. I imagined his face, the confusion, the denial. And then I imagined something else. Margaret sitting calmly at a table somewhere, adjusting her plan. Daniel telling a different story, a quieter one where I was emotional, unstable, overreacting. I understood something then. If I left now, they would control the ending. They would explain my absence. They would rewrite my silence. They would keep the truth. Leaving would protect me in the short term, but it would allow them to continue exactly as they always had, quietly, confidently, without consequence. Staying meant risk. It meant waking up every day beside a man who believed he had already won. It meant sharing space with someone who was watching me for signs of resistance. It meant pretending I did not know what I knew. But staying also meant time. Time to understand. Time to observe. Time to let them reveal themselves fully. I did not need to confront them yet. I did not need to accuse or explain. I needed clarity, and clarity requires patience. Daniel came into the kitchen while I was still thinking. He kissed my cheek, asked if I had slept well, reached for his coffee. I watched him carefully for the first time. The timing of his questions, the way his eyes lingered on my face for half a second longer than usual, as if checking. I answered calmly, normally. "Fine," I said, "just tired." He nodded, relieved. That was when I realized something important. They believed they were dealing with a version of me that no longer existed. They believed I was still the woman who trusted without question, who filled silence with reassurance, who smoothed over discomfort to keep the peace. They believed silence meant compliance. I began to see the pattern clearly. Margaret did not dominate through force. She dominated through certainty. She spoke as if decisions had already been made, as if disagreement was irrelevant. Daniel followed that certainty. He did not lead, he aligned. Together they moved slowly, carefully, making everything look reasonable from the outside. If I confronted them now, I would become the disruption, the problem, the unstable one. That was not a role I was willing to play. I wanted the truth to stand on its own, without my emotions attached to it, without my voice having to rise. That required restraint, so I chose the more difficult path. I chose to stay.
not because I was afraid to leave, but because I refused to be erased quietly. Staying did not mean submission, it meant preparation. I stopped sharing unnecessary details. I listened more than I spoke. I noticed what questions were asked and when. I began to understand that power does not always announce itself. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it watches. Margaret spoke to me later that day, casually, as if nothing had changed. Marriage takes adjustment, she said, especially for women. I smiled. I agreed. Inside, something settled. This was not about proving anything to them. This was about proving something to myself, that I could hold my ground without shouting, that I could see clearly without reacting, that I could choose my moment. Silence was not weakness, it was strategy, and I had just chosen mine. The first thing I did was not confront anyone. I waited, not because I was unsure, but because I needed to move carefully. That morning, after Daniel left for work, I sat at the dining table with my phone in front of me. I did not scroll. I did not distract myself. I made a list, not on paper, in my head. What I knew, what I owned, what I needed to protect. Then I made the first call. I rang my father. He answered on the third ring. Emily, is everything all right? I kept my voice steady. Yes, I just need to ask you something. There was a pause. He knows me well enough to hear when something is not being said. If a house was bought before marriage, I asked, and it is only in my name, does anyone else have a claim to it? He did not answer immediately. When he did, his voice was calm. No, not unless you deliberately make it joint property. I closed my eyes. What if my husband lives there? I asked. What if we are married? That does not change ownership, he said. In England, premarital assets stay with the original owner, unless you mix finances or sign something. I took a breath. And if someone tried to pressure me into changing that? There was another pause, this one heavier. Then you do nothing, my father said. You do not sign, you do not agree, and you speak to a solicitor. I thanked him. We did not talk about why I was asking. We both understood that would come later. When I ended the call, my hands were steady. That mattered. The second call took longer to make, not because I did not know who to call, but because saying things out loud makes them real. I called Hannah. We had been friends since university. She specialized in family law. She had always been practical to the point of bluntness. Emily, she said, you do not usually call before noon. What is going on? I need advice, I replied. Quiet advice. She did not joke. She did not interrupt. Tell me what you know, she said. I did not tell her how I felt. I told her what I had heard, what was said, how it was said. She listened. When I finished, there was silence on the line. All right, Hannah said eventually. First things first, you do not confront anyone. I almost smiled. Second, she continued, you do not sign anything, ever, not without me. And third, she said, we make sure you understand your position. She explained it clearly, simply. In the UK, a house bought before marriage is usually considered non-matrimonial property. Living in it does not change that. Marriage does not automatically transfer ownership. But pressure matters, patterns matter, intent matters. If they are planning to manipulate you, Hannah said, then documentation becomes your shield. What kind of documentation? I asked. Messages, emails, recordings where legal, any pattern that shows intent. I thought of Margaret's voice, the certainty, the plan. I have something already, I said quietly. We will talk about that later, Hannah replied. For now, your job is to observe. She paused. And Emily, she added, do not underestimate how dangerous calm people can be when they think they are in control. When the call ended, I did not feel relieved. I felt focused. This was no longer emotional. It was structural. I began to see my life differently, not as a story, but as a set of systems. Money, ownership, access. Daniel came home that evening and asked how my day had been. Fine, I said, just sorting things out. What kind of things? He asked casually. I smiled. Wedding admin. He nodded, satisfied. Margaret sent a message later that night, asking if I had settled in, if I needed help organizing paperwork. I replied politely, briefly, all sorted, thank you. I did not explain. I did not ask questions. I understood something now. The first stage of fighting back is not action, it is information. Knowing where you stand, knowing what can be taken, knowing what cannot. They believed I was unprepared, unprotected, alone. They were wrong on all 3 counts. If you are still listening, let me ask you something. Have you ever realized that the most powerful move is not reacting, but understanding the rules before anyone else does? If that resonates with you, comment number 2 below and stay with me, because this was only the beginning. Once you stop reacting, you begin to notice everything. That was what happened next. Now that I was no longer trying to keep the peace, patterns started to appear. Small ones at first, easy to miss if you were still hoping for the best. Daniel began asking questions more often. Not direct questions, casual ones. What time will you be home? Who are you meeting? Did you spend much today? He said them lightly, almost kindly, but the timing mattered, and so did the repetition. He started checking his phone more when we were together, looking up when I walked into a room, pausing when I spoke, as if deciding whether my answer was enough. It was subtle, carefully measured. Margaret, on the other hand, stopped pretending. She no longer asked questions, she made statements. You should organize your paperwork soon, she said one afternoon. Married life requires structure. Another day she commented, Daniel works hard. It is important that he feels supported at home. She said these things as if they were facts, not suggestions, not opinions. I listened. I nodded. I did not push back, because every word she spoke revealed something. I began keeping records, not obsessively, not emotionally, methodically. Dates, times, phrases repeated more than once. When Daniel asked to see a bank statement, I noted how he asked, not as a request, as an assumption. When Margaret mentioned the house again, I noted the language, ownership, responsibility, duty. One evening, Daniel suggested we sit down and talk about finances. It is normal for couples to do this, he said. We should be transparent. I agreed. We sat at the table. He opened his laptop. I watched his hands. He spoke about budgets, future plans, long-term security. Then he said it. It might be easier if we eventually put everything together, just to simplify things. I asked calmly, "What do you mean by everything?" "The house," he replied. "Our accounts, all of it." There it was. I did not argue. I did not say no. I said, "Let me think about it." His shoulders relaxed. He smiled. That reaction mattered. Margaret came over the next day. Daniel was out. She did not wait for him. She walked through the house, commenting as she went. The kitchen, the living room, the spare bedroom. "It would make sense to update this place," she said. "Make it feel more like a family home." She sat down opposite me. "You are very capable," she said, "but marriage means sharing decisions." I looked at her and smiled. "Of course." She leaned back. "You know," she continued, "Daniel has always listened to me. He trusts my judgment." I said nothing. She filled the silence. "We just want what is best for both of you." But her eyes told a different story. They were not asking, they were measuring. That evening, Daniel asked me if I had spoken to his mother. "She mentioned you two talked," he said, "about practical things." I answered honestly, "Yes, we talked." "What did you say?" he asked. I paused. Not too long, just enough. I told her I was considering everything carefully. He nodded, satisfied again. That night I lay awake, listening to him breathe beside me. Even in sleep, his body felt alert, as if part of him was waiting. I understood then how this worked. They applied pressure gradually, never enough to provoke resistance, always enough to shift boundaries. I did not need to provoke them. I needed to let them continue. So I did something simple. I became agreeable. I asked questions. I thanked them for advice. I delayed decisions without refusing them. And in return, they grew confident. Margaret spoke more freely. Daniel assumed more. One afternoon, while Daniel was on the phone in the next room, I heard my name. His voice was low, controlled. "It is progressing," he said. "She is thinking about it." There was a pause. "No, she has not said no." Another pause. "I am handling it." I stood still, my phone in my hand. Recording. Not everything, just enough. By then I was no longer surprised. This was not escalation for them, it was confirmation. They believed the outcome was inevitable. They believed time was on their side. What they did not realize was that every step they took forward was being documented. Every assumption, every overreach, every moment of control disguised as concern. I was not waiting for them to make a mistake. I was letting them build the case themselves. And somewhere beneath the calm routine of daily life, a deadline was forming, not one they had set, one I had. If you have ever watched someone grow careless because they thought you were compliant, you know what comes next. And so did I. It was only a matter of timing now. By then, the tone had changed completely, not overnight, not suddenly, but enough that I could feel it in my body before I could explain it in words. Daniel stopped asking. He started telling. "You should really cut back on seeing your friends," he said one evening. "It is distracting."
Another time, I think it is better if big decisions go through me first. He smiled when he said it, as if this was normal, as if this was care. Margaret was less careful. "You are too sensitive," she said when I questioned a comment. "Marriage requires thicker skin." When I stayed quiet, she added, "You do not want to be difficult so early on." That word stayed with me. Difficult. It was used often, casually, as a warning. They spoke about my life as if it were a project they had inherited. Daniel commented on my clothes, not directly, subtly. "That dress looks a bit impractical. You do not need to look so polished at home." Margaret commented on my time, my habits, my priorities. "A wife should be more available. Your career is fine, but family comes first." None of these statements were shouted. None of them sounded cruel on their own. That was what made them effective. They chipped away, slowly, relentlessly. I felt anger rising for the first time, hot, sharp, demanding action. But I did nothing. Because anger is loud, and loud people are dismissed. Instead, I did something else. I softened. I hesitated before answering. I sighed. I looked uncertain. "I am just trying to adjust," I said. "I do not want to get things wrong." Their response was immediate. Daniel relaxed. Margaret leaned forward, reassured. They mistook my restraint for weakness. Margaret began making bolder demands. She suggested I give Daniel access to all my accounts, for convenience. "You can trust your husband," she said, "if you have nothing to hide." Daniel followed up later. "It would make things easier," he said. "My mum is just worried about stability." I nodded, slowly. "I understand," I said. "Let me think about it." That phrase became my shield. "Let me think about it." I repeated it calmly, consistently, without emotion. In return, the pressure increased. Margaret criticized how I ran the house. Daniel criticized how I spent my time. When I pushed back gently, they reframed it. "We are only trying to help. You are overthinking." One afternoon, Margaret said something she had not said before. "You should be grateful," she said. "Not every woman gets this level of guidance." I felt something twist inside me. Guidance. That was what she called control. That night, Daniel crossed a line. He told me he had spoken to a financial advisor, someone he trusted. "He thinks it would be sensible for me to manage things for a while," Daniel said, "until you feel more settled." I looked at him. I said nothing. He continued, "You have been emotional lately. It might be better if I take the lead." That was the moment I knew they were no longer testing boundaries. They believed the boundaries were gone. I felt the urge to say everything, to expose everything. Instead, I lowered my eyes. "If you think that is best," I said quietly. The relief on his face was immediate, almost embarrassing. "Good," he said. "I knew you would understand." Margaret smiled when she heard. "See," she said, "you are learning." Learning. That was what they thought was happening. What was actually happening was this. They were becoming careless. They stopped filtering their language, stopped hiding their assumptions. They spoke freely about what I should do, what I should give up, what I should accept.
and every time they did, I noted it. I remembered Hannah's words. Calm people are dangerous when they believe they are in control. So I played the role they wanted. I became smaller, quieter, more agreeable. I asked for advice. I thanked them for it, and in return, they revealed themselves. If you have ever watched someone push further only because you did not push back, you know this feeling. That moment when you realize the cruelty was always there, it just needed permission. If you are still listening, ask yourself this. Have you ever agreed to something you knew was wrong just to see how far someone would go? If the answer is yes, comment number 3 below. And stay with me, because they had no idea how close they were to the edge. There is a moment when you stop collecting information, not because there is nothing left to learn, but because one more piece would change nothing. I did not know I had reached that moment until it happened. It was an ordinary afternoon, grey sky, light rain tapping against the windows. Daniel was working from home. Margaret had come over earlier than expected. I stayed in the kitchen, making tea, listening. They did not lower their voices this time. They thought I was busy, occupied, still harmless. Margaret spoke first. "You are taking too long," she said. "You told me this would be sorted by now." Daniel sighed, a sound I had never heard before. "It is not that simple," he replied. "She wants time." Margaret laughed, not kindly. "Time is what people ask for when they are afraid." There was a pause. "You have been too soft," she continued. "You let her think she has a choice." I reached for my phone, not rushed, not shaking. Recording. Daniel replied quietly, "I am handling it." Margaret's voice sharpened. "Then handle it properly." Another pause. He hesitated. "She is not stupid," Daniel said. "If we push too hard, she might talk to someone." Margaret dismissed that instantly. "She will not," she said. "Women like her do not expose things, they endure them." I felt something settle in my chest. Daniel spoke again. "Once the paperwork is done," he said, "everything will calm down." Margaret leaned in. "And once the house is secured," she added, "we do not need to pretend anymore." That sentence changed everything, not because I was shocked, but because it was so clear. Daniel did not argue. He did not correct her. He agreed. "Yes," he said, "that is the plan." Silence followed, heavy, final. I turned the recording off. I did not need more. Later that evening, Daniel came into the living room. He looked relaxed, almost pleased. "We should talk soon," he said, "about moving forward." I met his eyes. "Forward how?" I asked. He hesitated, just a fraction. "You know," he said, "making things official, putting everything on the table." I nodded slowly. "That sounds sensible," I replied. He smiled, the same smile he had used for weeks, relieved again. Then came the second moment, the one he did not realize mattered. We were sitting quietly when he said, almost to himself, "Mum was right. Once everything is signed, this will be so much easier." I looked at him. "Signed?" I asked gently. He froze, just for a second. Then he recovered. "Just normal things," he said quickly. "Nothing important." But it was already too late. That was not a slip. It was confirmation.
I excused myself and went upstairs. I locked the bathroom door. I sat on the edge of the bath and listened to the recording again. Not emotionally, practically. Clear voices, clear intent, clear ownership language. No shouting, no threats, just entitlement. That was when I knew. I had enough. Not enough to confront them, not enough to explode, enough to win. I sent the recording to Hannah. No explanation, just one message. This is what I have. She replied minutes later. Do nothing. This is strong. I put the phone down. For the first time since the wedding, my body relaxed. Not because I felt safe, but because I felt ready. They believed I was waiting, confused, indecisive. What I was actually doing was closing the door quietly behind them. I went back downstairs. Daniel looked up. Everything all right? He asked. I smiled. Yes, I said. Just tired. Margaret left soon after, satisfied, certain. They had no idea that the story had just changed direction and that the next move would not be mine to explain. It would be theirs to answer for. Sometimes the most powerful moment is not when you speak. It is when you stop needing to. The invitation went out on a Tuesday. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would raise suspicion. A family dinner at the house. My house. I kept the message simple. It would be nice to sit down together, properly, just us. Daniel read it and smiled. That sounds good, he said. About time, really. Margaret replied within minutes. Of course, family matters are best discussed calmly. Calmly. That word again. The days leading up to it felt unreal, like living inside a held breath. I moved through routines carefully. Work, meals, small talk. Daniel was relaxed, lighter than he had been in weeks. Margaret was polite, almost warm. They believed this dinner was for alignment, for closure, for control. They did not realize it was for confirmation. I prepared the house like I always did, clean, orderly, nothing out of place. I laid the table, set 3 places, poured water into glasses. Every movement was deliberate, not rushed, not emotional. The night arrived quietly. Daniel changed his shirt, checked his hair in the mirror. He looked confident. Margaret arrived early, as she always did. She kissed my cheek, complimented the food, commented on the weather. Everything felt ordinary. That was the most unsettling part. We sat down to eat. The conversation stayed shallow. Work updates, a neighbour's renovation, a comment about traffic. Daniel laughed. Margaret nodded approvingly. I listened. I watched how Daniel deferred to his mother, how Margaret waited before speaking, how they moved as a unit. After the plates were cleared, Daniel leaned back. So, he said, shall we talk about the practical side of things? Margaret folded her hands. It is important to have clarity, she added, especially at the beginning. I nodded, calm, open. Of course, I said, clarity matters. They exchanged a look, a brief one, satisfied. Daniel continued. We have been thinking about next steps, making things official, Margaret smiled. Security is important for a young couple, she said,
especially when assets are involved. Assets. I let the word hang in the air. I agree, I said. Security matters. Daniel leaned forward. It would be sensible, he said, to simplify things. Joint ownership, joint decisions. Margaret added, it would remove unnecessary complications. I looked at them, both of them. I asked gently, complications for whom? Daniel blinked, just once. For us, he replied, for the family. The family, Margaret nodded. Yes, she said, we all benefit when things are aligned. There it was, out in the open, still wrapped in calm. I reached for my glass of water, took a sip, put it down. I have been thinking about that, I said, about alignment. Their attention sharpened. Daniel smiled. Margaret sat straighter. I agree that decisions should be clear, I continued, and documented. Margaret smiled wider. Exactly, she said. Documentation protects everyone. I met her gaze. It does, I said. That is why I wanted us all together. Daniel glanced at his mother, confident, expectant. Margaret nodded, encouraging. They thought this was the moment I would give in, sign, agree. They did not know that everything had already been decided. Not out loud, not yet. The room felt very quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears. Daniel spoke again. So, he said, what do you think? I smiled, softly. I think we should make sure everything is understood first, I replied. No confusion, no assumptions. Margaret tilted her head. You seem very serious tonight, she said. Is everything all right? I nodded. It is, I said. I just want us all to be honest. Daniel laughed lightly. Of course, he said. Honesty is important. Margaret agreed. It always has been. I looked around the table, at the familiar faces, at the confidence. They were comfortable, too comfortable. They believed the outcome was guaranteed. What they did not realize was that this dinner was not about persuading me. It was about letting them speak. One more time, in the same calm voices, with the same assumptions. The storm was not loud, not yet. It was waiting. If you are still listening, take a moment. Notice how silence can feel heavier than shouting, how politeness can hide intention. If you feel that tension building too, comment number 4 below. And stay with me, because the calm never lasts. I did not raise my voice. That surprised them. They were ready for tears, for shouting, for emotion. What they were not prepared for was calm. I placed my hands flat on the table and looked at both of them. There is something I need you to hear, I said. All of you. Daniel frowned slightly. Margaret's smile tightened. This is unnecessary, she said. We were having a conversation. I nodded. We still are. I reached for my phone. Daniel leaned back, confident, almost bored. Margaret watched my hands carefully. I want to be clear, I continued. I am not asking questions tonight. They exchanged a glance. I am explaining. I pressed play. At first, there was only background noise, a clink of a cup, a chair moving. Then Margaret's voice filled the room. You are taking too long. You told me this would be sorted by now. Her own voice, sharp, unmistakable. Daniel's head lifted. Margaret's face changed, just slightly. The recording continued. Once the paperwork is done, everything will calm down. And once the house is secured, we do not need to pretend anymore. Silence crashed into the room. Daniel stared at the table. Margaret opened her mouth, closed it. I let the recording play a little longer, not all of it, just enough. Then I stopped it. I did not look at them immediately. I spoke first. This conversation was recorded in my own home, I said. And before you ask, yes, it is admissible. Daniel looked up sharply. Margaret found her voice. This is outrageous, she said. You recorded a private conversation. I turned to her. You discussed taking my property, I replied. In my home, without my knowledge. Her eyes flicked to Daniel. He said nothing. I continued. There is more, I said, but this is the part that matters. I tapped the screen again. This time, Daniel's voice filled the room. It is progressing. She has not said no. I am handling it. He went pale. Margaret stood up. This is manipulation, she said. You are twisting things. I finally looked at her properly. No, I said. I stopped twisting myself. I stood. And because I knew this would be denied, I continued, I asked someone to be here. The doorbell rang. Daniel turned in his chair, confused. I walked to the door and opened it. Hannah stepped inside, calm, professional. She nodded to me, then to them. I am Emily's solicitor, she said. I specialize in family law. Margaret laughed, too loudly. This is ridiculous, she said. Family discussions do not require lawyers. Hannah did not react. Discussions do not, she replied. Plans to obtain property under pressure do. She placed a folder on the table. Inside are transcripts of recordings, Hannah continued, along with a timeline of repeated attempts to influence ownership of a premarital asset. Daniel stood up. She agreed to talk, he said. She never said no. Hannah turned to him. Consent requires clarity, she said, and absence of pressure. She looked back at Margaret. And guidance is not the same as coercion. Margaret's face hardened. You are overreacting, she said. This is family. Hannah remained calm. This is law, she replied. I sat back down. I want to be very clear now, I said. My house remains mine. There will be no joint ownership, no signatures, no transfers. Daniel swallowed. You cannot do this, he said. We are married. I met his eyes. And you cannot take what was never yours, I replied. Hannah slid another document across the table. This is a formal notice, she said. Any further attempt to pressure my client regarding her property will be documented. Margaret's composure finally cracked. You planned this, she said to me. You deceived us. I shook my head. No, I said. I listened. Daniel looked at me, really looked. When were you going to tell me? He asked. I answered honestly.
I was waiting to see how far you would go. That landed. The room felt smaller, tighter. Hannah gathered her papers. My client will be seeking a separation, she said, effective immediately. Daniel stepped back. Margaret sat down heavily. This is not over, she said. You are making a mistake. I stood one last time. No, I said. I am ending one. Hannah moved toward the door. I followed. Before I left the room, I turned back. I wanted this to be clear, I said. I did not expose you out of anger. I did it because truth does not need volume. I walked out. The door closed behind me. For the first time since the wedding, I did not feel like I was holding my breath. I felt steady. If you are still listening, let me ask you something. Have you ever realized that the most powerful moment is when you stop explaining yourself? If that resonates with you, comment number 5 below and stay with me, because the aftermath is where the real cost appears. The aftermath was quieter than anyone expects. There were no shouting matches, no dramatic scenes, no public humiliation, just paperwork, silence, and distance. Daniel moved out within the week, not because he wanted to, but because he had nowhere left to stand. Hannah handled everything: letters, timelines, boundaries. The law did what it always does when things are clear. It followed the evidence. The house remained mine, exactly as it had been before the wedding, before the promises, before the plans. Daniel contested nothing in the end. There was no dramatic defense, no final speech. He knew. Margaret tried once. She sent a message asking for a conversation, for closure, for civility. I did not reply. Not because I was angry, but because I was done. The divorce itself was simple, almost disappointingly so. Forms, signatures, dates. No assets to divide, no joint accounts, no negotiations. The marriage ended the way it truly was, quietly, efficiently, without love. Daniel attended the final appointment alone. I joined by phone. When the solicitor confirmed it was complete, there was no rush of emotion, just relief. Not happiness, not triumph, relief. Margaret lost something too. Not money, not status, authority. Without access to my home, without influence over decisions, without control disguised as concern. She became smaller. Her messages stopped. Her presence faded. People like her only thrive where they can steer outcomes. Once that is gone, there is nothing left to say. Daniel sent one final message. I never meant for it to go this far. I read it once, then deleted it. Intent does not undo impact, and explanations do not restore trust. I did not respond. Not because I wanted him to suffer, but because I no longer needed him to understand. That was the real shift. I did not seek revenge. I did not tell mutual friends what had happened. I did not share recordings. I did not correct stories. Letting go also means letting others believe what they choose. The truth does not require a campaign. It stands. In the weeks that followed, my life became smaller but stronger. I returned to routines that belonged to me. Morning walks, work without distraction, evenings without tension. The house felt different, not empty, clear. I changed nothing at first. Then, slowly, I moved things, opened windows, let light in. I realized something important. I had not lost time. I had learned how quickly safety can be simulated and how quietly danger can present itself as care. I had learned to trust my instincts without reacting to them, to observe before acting, to choose timing over impulse. Most importantly, I learned this. Freedom does not arrive with noise. It arrives with the absence of pressure. One afternoon, as I stood in the kitchen making tea, I noticed my hands were steady, not because nothing could ever hurt me again, but because I knew how to protect myself. That knowledge stays. If you are still listening, let me leave you with this. You do not need to punish those who tried to control you. You only need to remove their access. If that resonates with you, comment number 6 below. And remember, walking away with clarity is not weakness, it is resolution. Life after the ending was not dramatic. That surprised me. There was no sudden happiness, no moment where everything felt resolved. There was simply space. Space to wake up without bracing myself. Space to make decisions without explaining them. Space to breathe. I kept the house, not because it was a victory, but because it was mine. I did not rush to change it. I did not redecorate immediately. I let it stay quiet. In that quiet, I learned something important. Peace does not arrive as a feeling. It arrives as the absence of pressure. My days became ordinary again. Work, walks, evenings with books I actually finished. Sometimes I ate dinner early. Sometimes I forgot to eat at all, and that was fine. Control had left the room, and with it the constant need to adjust myself. I did not avoid the past, but I did not live in it either. Once, months later, I saw Daniel across a street, by chance. He looked thinner, less certain. We did not speak. There was no anger, no urge to explain, just recognition. We had already said everything that mattered. I did not wonder what he thought of me, or what story he told. When you are no longer trying to be understood, those questions lose their power. Margaret never contacted me again. That silence did not feel like punishment. It felt like distance, the kind that allows healing. I began trusting myself again. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, in small ways. By listening when something felt off, by pausing instead of reacting, by choosing clarity over comfort. I learned that silence is often misunderstood. People think silence means fear or weakness or surrender. Sometimes it does, but sometimes silence is simply listening closely. Sometimes it is gathering information. Sometimes it is choosing the right moment. I learnt that tears are not evidence. They express pain, but they do not always protect you. Facts do. Patterns do. Truth does. And truth does not need performance. It only needs to be preserved. Most of all, I learned to trust the feeling that arrives before words. That quiet tightening in the chest, that pause in the body, that moment when something does not sit right. That is not imagination. That is instinct. It exists to keep you alive.
I did not leave this marriage feeling broken. I left it informed, and that difference matters. I did not need revenge. I did not need an audience. I needed my life back, on my terms, and I took it. If you are listening to this and something in you feels familiar, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not weak for staying quiet. You are not foolish for taking time. You are not dramatic for noticing patterns others ignore. Silence is not the absence of strength. Sometimes it is the beginning of it. Evidence is stronger than tears. Preparation is stronger than confrontation. And intuition is not emotion. It is survival. If this story stayed with you until the end, take a moment before you move on. Ask yourself where you might need to listen more closely in your own life. And if this resonated with you, comment number 7 below. Thank you for staying. Thank you for listening. And remember, walking away with clarity is not losing. It is choosing yourself.